Okay, this is question 2 on the higher non-calculator paper. Now, this question occupies the whole page, so I've had to zoom out quite a bit. So I'm going to actually move the sheet around as we progress through the question. Let's read it first. The scattergraph shows information about 10 apartments in a city. The graph shows the distance from the city center and the monthly rent of each apartment. So that's the monthly rent, that's the distance from the city center, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and there's the monthly rent in hundreds. Okay, so I think I don't need any bits from the top so far, so if I move this upwards a bit so that we could see the last part of the question, or part A of the question. The table shows the distance from the city center and monthly rent for 2 other apartments. So there are 2 other apartments. The distance from the city center, 2 kilometers, and the monthly rent is 250. And then that's 3.1 kilometers, and the monthly rent is 190. Okay, so I'm going to just move this further forward a bit so we could see part A and part B. Okay, so on the scatter graph, plot. So they want me to plot information from the table. On the scatter graph, they want me to plot the information from the table. I'm going to use a pencil for this. So if I make a mistake, I could always rub it off. So when the distance is 2 kilometers, the monthly rent is 250. So distance 2 kilometers, the monthly rent, that's 200, that's 300, 250 is over there. So that's going to be that point there, and I'm going to mark it with a cross. Right, so I know that's pretty accurate. I think I've got that spot on. Okay, the next one, when the distance is 3.1 kilometers, the monthly rent is £190. So a bit more tricky this time. I need to make sure I appreciate the scale. So that's 3 kilometers, that's 4 kilometers. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 spaces, so each one stands for 0.1. So 3.1 is going to be over there at that point. And then 190, so that's 100, that's 200. And there again 10 spaces in there. Each of them is going to stand for 10, so that's 110, 120, 130, 140, 150, and so on, all the way up to 190. Now you need to get this spot on because the examiners aren't going to give you any leeway for this. I've just marked the point and I'm going to put a cross exactly where it is. That's 3.1 and that's 190. So that's my second point, and there's my answer. That is a pretty straightforward mark to get, right? Make sure you do get it in a question of this type. Okay. Going on to part B, I just need to pull this forward a bit. Part B says describe the relationship between the distance from the city center and the monthly rent. Describe the relationship between the distance from the city center and the monthly rent. Now, I checked the mark scheme for this because you could write a sentence to say something like, as the distance from the center increases, as the distance from the city center increases, the monthly rent decreases. So I could write that sentence, or I could simply put there's a negative correlation. I think most people would put that, right? And the mark scheme has indicated that that's okay. It's okay to put that it's a negative correlation. And how do you know it's a negative correlation? Well, you could see from the graph that it's sloping downwards. As you go from left to right, it's sloping downwards. That's a negative correlation. This question, although it occupies a whole page, is only worth 2 marks. So it's a pretty straightforward question. Make sure you do get all the marks for it. There is another part to the question, and that part is part C. So if I just show that part C to that question, an apartment is 2.8 kilometers from the city center. So it's 2.8 kilometers from the city center. Find an estimate of the monthly rent of this apartment. So it's 2.8 kilometers from the city center. Now I need to go back to the graph for this, and so looking at the graph, one of the things I need to do is to draw a line of best fit. Now the line of best fit needs to go through the center of most of these points here. You're never going to get it perfect, and every line of best fit is going to be slightly different, but I want to get a line that's going to go about through the center of most of these points. And yeah, that's not too bad. Okay, that's going through the center. You could count the points on either side, but just doing it by eye, you can tell about where it is. Now, if I go back to part C, in part C, they said an apartment is 2.8 kilometers from the city center, and they wanted me to estimate the monthly rent for this apartment. So 2.8 kilometers is there on that line. So I'm actually going to use the line of best fit, and you need to have a line of best fit in order to get the marks for this, and work across from there. Okay, so there's my line of best fit, and it tells me that the monthly rent for a place that's 2.8 kilometers away from the city center is going to be £200. So back to part C, I'm going to write in £200 just there. Now again, as I indicated before, this is a pretty straightforward question, and it's easy to get full marks. There are 4 marks all together, right? Make sure you do get them.